Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Franchise Show. This is the show, I'm going to do it, where we get under the hat of some of the most important topics in franchising. And what is it? It's a live show. Well, it's live if it's February 25th, somewhere between 5:15 and about 6 o'clock in the UK. And it's fantastic if you are here to put up a comment, because this show is for you. It's a conversation between us all. And each week we take a different subject and we have a lovely guest, or in this case, guests. And the topic this week that we're going to be discussing is, how do your franchisees feel? And the lovely guest that we've got to talk about this particular subject is returning, in fact, third time returning guest, Danny Wareham. Danny, welcome to the Franchise Show.
Hello there. Glutton for punishment, me, Harvey. Glad to be back. These are always lovely chats. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, you're very welcome. And we have our supporter and sponsor, the lovely Neil Newman from Gather. And it's great to have you with us. Welcome to the Franchise Show.
Hi, Harvey, and thanks for inviting us along. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic. You're most welcome. Well, look, let's start off. Most of the people listening here today will know you both, but let's go for a little introduction. We'll go for Danny first. Danny, perhaps you could just introduce yourself and what you do.
So morning, evening, afternoon, everybody. My name's Danny
Morecambe and Wise that did that.
We're a bit to me to you. I can do all the comedy greats if you like. So my name's Danny Wareham. I'm an organizational psychologist who believes that happy bees make tasty honey. If we have the right environment, the right culture, the right level of engagement, then performance is a side effect of that. And I specialize in two areas. One is kind of social dynamics, so culture and employee engagement, and how do we get people to team well with each other purposefully. And the second is individual differences and personality, with a particular interest in narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellism, and when they can be good and when they can be bad.
Fantastic. Excellent. Good stuff. Thanks for that introduction. And Neil, I mean, again, most people will know you and what you do, but for the people who don't, perhaps you could do a little introduction.
Thanks, Harvey. I don't think they will, but thanks for that. Boosting me up there. Yeah, I'm Neil Newman. I'm the founder of Gather. Gather was created to help address what we see as a big paradigm shift in the market in terms of how businesses engage with both their staff and their customers, by making it easier for them to engage, and for equally easier for the businesses to understand that in quantitative measures that just reduce all the noise and make it simpler to see what's going on in the business, both internally and externally.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that. What I'm going to do now is I want to address the fact that we have a QR code top left, which says franchise inquiry. Now, I'd encourage everybody who's listening to scan that one, because this is a bit of a test. This is going to take you to, and I'm going to say this word because we're going to talk about whether we should say this word, but it's going to take you to a survey. Now, Neil hates that word, but it's going to take, okay? And we're going to talk about why we shouldn't call it that in a minute. But all right, it'll take you to an assessment. There you go, Neil. And this assessment we put on here hopefully will resonate with us all as franchise enthusiasts here. And this is an assessment that's designed to help a potential business owner or somebody who's interested in a franchise make an inquiry, and help that franchisor understand a little bit more about that inquiry when it comes in. But it's going to be in an engaging way, and it's going to be in a way that doesn't take a huge amount of time. It's not a laborious, long form. So please have a look at it. See whether there's questions you would include in there that we haven't, or if you think there's anything that's irrelevant or could be put in a different way, because I think it's something that can really help us as an industry try and align with potential franchisees. So please scan that, and we'll reference to that as we go along today. Before we introduce some people that are here with us already today, I want to start by asking both of you about how you feel about how you feel. I'm going to use that expression a lot today, but how you feel about our subject today. So I'm going to start with you, Neil, and our subject is, how do our franchisees feel? It's because Danny's not very well, and he needs to have his honey and his lemon. Focus on the honey. But perhaps in the context of, you talked a lot there about engagement and these assessments. Talk a little bit about how we can identify how people feel, and how you've done that.
Okay, well, one of the things that we see a lot in our platform and how it's used elsewhere in different situations is that people can be more honest when they're not being confronted. I'm not saying you shouldn't have face-to-face. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm just saying some people are more uncomfortable in saying the truths. So the platform gives them that opportunity to say, you know, I said I think you're great. Well, actually, this is what I truly think, because I don't have the gusto to actually tell you face-to-face. The franchisor or the business wants to know those things so they can rectify them. So that's what, you know, we're trying to bring to the party, and on the basis of Danny's experience, trying to phrase those things in a way that is engaging and does bring value, and doesn't overcomplicate things. So all businesses, whether they're a business with employees, they want to know what their employees think. The franchisor wants to know what the franchisees think. That if there's a situation going on within their franchisees they're not aware of, that could escalate out of control, cause disruption, all sorts of problems, and they end up being expensive. And that's all the things we're trying to avoid across all manner of areas of the business.
Oh, absolutely. And you're completely right. And I mean, it's trying to also get people to express how they feel and engage as a franchisee from a good place, or at least from a neutral place. Often people engage with these things from a very negative place. You know, if you leave a review about a restaurant, it's often, unfortunately, because you haven't had a good experience, or it has to be the absolute best experience of your life for you to be moved to it. So to try and get people to engage when they've had an experience, and to try and for people to understand what that general experience is really important, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, we've written a paper called Moving from Mediocre, which deals with that middle ground where people are only engaged because they haven't got a complaint and they're not that fussed. But you need to understand that middle ground as much as you need to understand the other end of the spectrum. Definitely. But the way to do that is to make it easy, make it intuitive, make it intelligent. If you don't do those things and you make it a 10-minute saga, no, we won't engage with it. Why do we expect others to engage with it?
100%. Before we go to you, Danny, I just want to recognise the fact that we've got a couple of people here live with us already. Let's welcome the ever wise Simon Wise. Good to have you with us, Simon. He's put hello, franchise friends. Well, hello to you as well, Simon. And we've got the lovely Louise Harris with us, QFP. Let's give her formal initials there as well. And Louise has put hello, listening in from the UK. Always good to have you with us, Louise. Let's just see what Simon's put here before we go on to Danny. Simon's put happy, successful franchisees equal franchise network growth. Yes, absolutely.
Danny are both nodding heads to that one.
I think that might be a play on the Happy Bees Make Tasty Honey.
Absolutely. Although someone once said to me, in fact, it was John Hewitt who said to me, and John Hewitt was responsible for introducing 5,000 franchisees to his businesses over a 50-year period. And he said the secret was exactly that: happy, successful franchisees. A simple mantra, but perhaps not simple to identify when somebody is happy and successful. Perhaps we can go now to you, Danny. What sort of questions do we ask, or how do we identify people's feelings when we're looking at our cultures and our business?
So this really interests me for a few reasons. in the sort of applied world, in the real world, we know that happy bees make tasty honey. We know if our people are engaged, then they're more likely to engage our customers. Our customers create a better bottom line. And it doesn't matter what the commercial model is, whether you're paid directly as an employee or you're part of a franchise model. It's exactly the same equation. But we get it so wrong so often. We kind of get in our own way. And some of that is the questions that we ask and the platforms that we ask them on. Some of that is when we ask the questions. The traditional model of sort of employee feedback is very different to customer feedback. Customer feedback, after every single call, every interaction, we constantly send them emails out of our CRMs. Whereas with employees, we tend to do one glint survey once a year and get their feedback, or maybe a coaching session in the corporate world once a month or once a quarter. So there's huge swathes of time where we don't really have any insight as to how our people are feeling or engaging with us as organizations. Yet we have thousands of touch points in between, where every day we're changing the opinion of what they think the relationship really is. So in my world, there's kind of two sides to it. One is what is employee engagement? What is what are the kind of levers that you can pull and use to create a better purposeful environment? So it's not strictly about happiness per se. It's about getting the behaviors that are going to support your organizational strategy, make your business successful. That helps drive happiness and engagement as almost an emergent outcome. And the second one is that as a scientist, there's a lot of bad science out there. There's a lot of practices that we do with the best of intentions and looking to experts to help us work out what's the right platforms, what's the right phraseology of the questions, and doing something with the insight, not just asking questions and then doing nothing with it. That too has a real place in my heart as a psychologist. And the last one is, everybody knows that happy bees make tasty honey. If we treat our people in certain ways, then that leads to fewer accidents, less illness, less wastage, better customer loyalty, more productivity, all these kind of bottom line measures. But some of my favorite studies are that purposefully engaged employees are more likely to put the bins out for their neighbors. They are more likely to donate their time to charities and community projects. So as employers and franchisees, if we have people in our care, I feel that you rent them from their family. So we have a duty to return them in a better position, in a better condition, back to the society that we've taken them from. And that includes putting the bins out for their neighbours and doing more in their communities.
Absolutely, absolutely well said. You said so many things. I ran out of space on the piece of paper right now.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely going to have to read that back. If more businesses had that exact attitude that you just stated there, we would definitely have some happier bees, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we don't exist in isolation. We're part of wider communities, and that's why listening to your employee programs, whether it's employee voice or touch or any of this other insight that we have the ability to glean, if we're not utilizing that, if we're doing it as a kind of perfunctory checkbox exercise once a year, then you're missing out not only on kind of competitive benefits, but also on societal benefits as well.
Yeah, 100%. What do you make of that, Neil? I mean, there's so many great things that have been said there, but
completely.
When we ask is so interesting as well. And what Dan said there about the fact that even with franchisees, we ask all these questions at the beginning, but perhaps we don't ask them so much
routinely. And that's the world over. I mean, everything is an annual blah blah, or maybe half an. You're just losing the whole now situation. Somebody could be happy when they've just finished their annual assessment for their staff, and then the following day been demoted and therefore going to resign. Whatever, you just don't know what's going on. So the two things there are, one, do barometer checks much more often. We work with care industry, and we suggest once a month. Once a day, too much. Once a week, possibly, but once a month is enough to give you an idea. Do I have any staff leaving or thinking about leaving? Do I have anybody in a situation where they need our support? because more often than not, even though they have an open office policy door, people don't walk through it because there's just and Danny's agree. They just don't walk through it because you've got all their peers looking at them as they walk. Why are they going into the office? And they've got to have the courage to do it in the first place. So there's all these things, all these anomalies. I'm not saying that nobody doesn't do it. There are people that do, who are brave enough to do that. But there are a lot of people that aren't. And the point is to measure much more frequently. More to the point, more than anything, be available 24/7. That's what we say. You can ask them on a frequency, absolutely, and you should, because if you say, I'm going to do it every 6 months, they might have resigned and left within that 6 months, or even worse, gone on long-term sick, because you haven't been able to know what their problems going on in their lives and be able to support them. But if you're available 24/7, they can reach out for support. And we've seen that on numerous cases with our clients where the staff have been much more confident. Again, going back to franchisees, they've been much more confident to speak up and say, actually, I know you asked me how I'm doing, but actually, I didn't actually tell you the whole truth. This is my concerns with how you're running us as a franchisee.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was really interesting you said there about, are your staff leaving? And again, it's sometimes people are checking these things when the extremes happen. Like there's a problem, so we should talk to our staff about how happy they are, or more often a negative extreme as well. Whereas if you get into a culture, let's use that expression, but if you get into a culture of assessing and allowing your staff, your peers, your suppliers, your franchisees to communicate effectively without judgment, freely. And you said that moving from mediocre. I quite like that expression because, as I say, that's where normality comes from. And that's where hopefully the majority of the time, we're bumping along a little bit up and down throughout that sort of that bulk of that middle period, really. Rather than, at those extremes. Before we continue the conversation, let's just recognize the fact that we have another couple of lovely people with us today. We've got Jitin. Great to have you with us, Jitin, and I will get back to your email as well. And he's put, good evening, Harvey and franchise friends. Well, good evening to you too. We have the lovely Penny Hock. Oh, look at that. Your QR code is up, Penny. We've got Penny with us. Penny for hello, Harvey, Danny and Neil. Looking forward to this week's discussion. Well, we're looking forward to it too. And it's been a good one so far. Perhaps, Neil, we can talk a little bit about, we jokingly referred to surveys and the fact that we shouldn't. Why shouldn't we call them surveys? What's so negative about that? Let's address this, because I'm going to say it by accident.
Well, I think Danny already knows. I think we all know. I don't have to explain this. We're drowned. We're literally drowned in surveys. So it has huge negative connotations. And we always, when we talk to our clients, we say, don't use the word survey. It's their opportunity to tell you what they think. That's what it is. It's not tell me this, tell me that. There are surveys and they do that, and there are market research surveys and they do that, and that's fine. Leave them to do that. They get hugely low response volumes. But by making sure your message up front prior to your engagement is there and clear and concise, which is it's about you, not about us. It's about you telling us how you think our business is. It's such a different way to engage than we'd like to know what you think, fill out our survey, which is just, it just turns you off from the second you finish the sentence. So, there's all the, and again, back to the psychology, it's all these ways about how to connect, how to engage with people to get them to engage with you. The second part of that is, for God's sake, do not make it more than a minute long. We haven't got the time to do it. Why do we expect others to do it? Oh, here's a 5 minute. Please spare 10 minutes for the survey. No. So, we optimize at sub-minute. That's our thing. Sub 30 seconds if we can do it. And we can do it. And we have done it. So that's where you want to be. So make it convenient for people so they want to express themselves. We have a huge amount of people, going back to something you said earlier about giving positive responses, not negative responses, both customers and staff. And it's because they know how easy it is. Oh, that only took me 20 seconds to do. I'm happy to do that again. And then on the dashboard, you've got green lights, everything's good. You know what's going on in your business. So it's just simplifying and making things easier.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the word has been overused with such negative connotations, and it just makes you sort of your eyes roll when it's mentioned, doesn't it? It's been used and abused in the wrong way over the years, because often salespeople would use it as something they'd say, can you fill out a survey? When what they really mean is, can I sell you something? And they were trying that as a different approach. And it's a real shame, because it's a word that accurately describes the mechanics of it in a way, but it doesn't really describe what it truly can do.
And the word feedback's gone down the same aisle, or going down the same aisle. And feedback should be considered a lot more concise and to the point than surveys. Surveys historically have come from a market research, tell me your demographic, tell me your age, tell me your inside leg measurement. We haven't even got to asking about the business. We want to know everything about you first. And that's not where we're coming from as a business. We're coming from, tell us what you think of us, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of that, Danny?
Yeah, excuse me, sorry. I have brought a friend with me, my influenza, by the way, so apologies if I'm sounding a little rough.
I'm a franchise influencer.
Completely agree. You can get survey fatigue, and I mean, we can address the fact that we call it semantic priming, when we associate one word with certain feelings. And the feelings around survey are generally, this is resource heavy, it's going to take my time, it's going to interrupt what I'm doing. And there might be better words to use, but ultimately it's, are we listening? That's it. And Neil's right in that a lot of surveys, because they are tracked back to a different purpose, so they might be tracked back to marketing are interested in customer avatars. So therefore, how do we create a kind of primary key in database language to connect it to the survey answers? Well, we can only do that by knowing your inside leg measurement and your age, etc. Some of the most useful surveys are those buttons that you get outside toilets in train stations and airports. It's literally, it doesn't interrupt your day. You press a button, it gives them a very quick, literally touch point of what did you think of the cleanliness of the bathrooms on that particular visit. It's not the whole picture. It doesn't tell you everything, but it gives you a really good indicator to go and think, well, we seem to be having quite a lot of orange, unhappy faces. Maybe we should send somebody with a bottle of bleach. And businesses often get this wrong, because the motive behind asking the question is not always to uncover an issue or to recognize when you're doing something right. It's to justify something they already know somewhere else in their business. So that's my view. I'll get off my soapbox now.
I think it's really interesting, and it makes me think, and we'll come on to Neil on this one, but when you do an assessment and when you're trying to engage with a group of people, and in case anybody missed it at the beginning, we've got a QR code that leads to an assessment that's designed to uncover, I suppose, a franchise avatar and who that franchisee or that potential business partner is. And do have a look at it if you just joined us. Scan that QR code, because we'd like to know what questions you would put into that, and how you would try and uncover a little bit about those people. But the point I was going to make is, I spent quite a lot of time last minute, as Neil knows, but I spent quite a lot of time doing this survey. It's really interesting. And what was interesting about it is the different ways you can ask a question on an assessment and when you're trying to engage I'm trying not to use that word, but it reminded me, because Danny was speaking about the toilets with the smiley faces, right? Now, when you're engaging on this type of assessment, you can use that as one of the options for a question, or you can use a multiple choice tick box, or you can use a comment box. What sort of interactions do you get with these different types of things, and how should they be used in your opinion?
I do like, I mean, absolutely, you should have free form text, not saying you shouldn't. But the great thing about enabling a selection is, one, it's damn sight easier for the end user to go, oh, that's me. Two, as you said yourself, Harvey, you knew most of the answers to the questions, which is why you supplied the answers. I didn't know the answers, but you supplied them. So it makes you, so from that pick list, you can see, are they passionate? If they're not passionate, then you can just filter and say, I don't want to look at the candidates that are not passionate. But equally, the other side about presenting answers is, again, it's easy for the end user, but it also puts context around what the question is. Because the question could be quite open-ended, but by giving the answers, they go, oh, I see what you're referring to. In that case, it's these answers. And they could go off-piste and give a completely different answer to the question you've given, because it's too open for them to understand. The third and final part about all of that, of course, is quantifiable. It's all in the database. You can see it. The platform automatically analyzes it and presents it in the dashboard, so you can see, 92% of your franchisees who are applying for this have selected these answers. So you can see a profile within seconds building in front of you. So I like the selection. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have open text. It's just sometimes it's harder to interpret. And I suppose that's where you start bringing in the AI things who will try and do evaluations of it. Where we are is it's much more hard science. It's definitively that's what they selected, rather than an algorithm deciding whether something is positive or negative.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about these words like avatars and profiles a lot, and it's quite hard sometimes. I was talking to somebody the other day about, and I always ask potential franchisors, what type of people choose their franchise. And it can often be very varied, where these people come from, an industry. So it's sometimes really hard to think, what is my avatar? And actually, the best way is to try and start to ask some questions and to engage with people who do make an inquiry, and to see whether then you can kind of reverse engineer it when you talk to the people who happen to inquire.
And I think a key to all of this, as we said right at the beginning about surveys, is don't make it arduous. Because if it's going to take me 5 minutes to fill it in, I might have just switched off already. If it's going to take me 40 seconds to fill in, well, then you've got my interest. Mm-hmm. I know we should say, well, they shouldn't be so lazy. This is la. But the problem is we all run out of time, and we all run out of interest, unfortunately. So you give me a huge form with 400 questions on it, I'm already not interested. It's that easy. And as you saw in the form, we only present one question at a time. You ask the question, we present another question. We don't consciously overwhelm the user with pages and pages of questions. That's a psychology tip there from Danny. Would like that one. Don't overwhelm the end user.
We're fascinated by two main parts of surveys, assessments, whatever you want to call it. One is validity. So are we measuring what we think we're measuring? That's what validity means. And the second is reliability. So when we measure it at multiple states in time, is it consistent? So if something has strong validity and strong reliability, it's a good assessment. And that's the way things like psychometrics work. Although I'm sure many of your guests may have taken some things that claim to be psychometrics, such as Myers-Briggs, and they get a different result when they do it 12 months later. That's because it's not a good test. It's not valid because it's not really measuring your personality, and it's not reliable because it's not producing the same result over time. That said, there are validity is really a measure of your bias, and there are lots of different, about 170 different cognitive biases, and by setting your surveys or setting your questions in a certain way, you can remove a huge amount of bias from the process. So one that you were referring to is called acquiesce bias, which is I'll just do it. I'll just tick through. I'll just get it done. Therefore, I've completed the survey. I've completed the assessment, but actually the data is not worth anything.
Absolutely.
And obviously by having shorter, more frequent surveys or assessments, you can minimize the risk of that. Social desirability you touched on, which is where people answer in a way to suit the person that's asking. So if the franchisor is in the room with the franchisee going, so what do you think of how great our coffee is? The chances are your data might not be valid. And that's before you get into things like internal consistency of the wording. So for example, is our company the best company to work for? Seems like a good question on its surface. You're either going to get a result of best, worst, or somewhere in between. But actually, the way it's phrased implies that you should answer it positively. So there's a bias in there encouraging it. It implies that best is the same for everybody. And some people, the best company might be the best salary. Some it might be the best culture. Some it might be the best workmates. And also it implies that you know what the company is. Now, do you judge company by my line manager and my group, or are you judging it by this huge franchisor? So just in that one question, you've introduced a couple of different biases. If you then have processes that force you to answer it in front of somebody or do it as part of a 100-question suite, then the chances are that the data that you're getting out of it is not going to be as robust as if you were to just make a few tweaks and a few changes and do more surveys less frequently.
So, I'd stop writing things down because I was just listening to you.
You can record. This is recorded. You can come back and watch it.
I'm liking Danny more and more. It's just we're on the same page on everything.
I'm not on commission. It's good science.
I'm not even paying him to be here. It was just really interesting because what you said there about that one question, how it's asked and those biases, they're so valid. And I was smiling as you were talking because I've done exactly that. I thought, especially the one you said there about answering how you think someone would want you to answer it, right? And that data is complete. It tells nothing about me or the person that's answering it because it's completely skewed. Yeah. And it doesn't even accurately describe the situation you're trying to answer either.
There are times when it's a good question, but as part of if you're trying to get hard and fast data, it's not a good question. If you're a salesperson and you're saying, what's your favorite thing about our coffee machines? Then a leading question forcing the person to not focus on the fact that it broke down last week, that might be a good leading question. But if you want robust data, there is at the extreme end, at my end, it's very difficult to write the items, the questions. If you're wanting a good indication of how your people feeling, though, the wording is not quite as important because you don't have to be a scientist, but providing you do other things to make it work. So simpler surveys asked at opportune times, not necessarily, if you know there's a problem in the bathrooms, then what's the point in focusing all of your surveys at that point? Because you're not going to get a nice holistic view of the population's experience of that bathroom across time. So how do you get a little bit smarter about when are you asking people how do they feel?
I tell you what's really interesting. When you said that there was 170 biases. Right?
Plus, yeah.
Now, when you say it like that, it seems to me that it doesn't matter how you phrase a question, when or where you ask it, there's going to be a bias there,
yes.
Right? It's just a matter of what biases and where you use those. I think what was also really interesting about what you said, people use the results of these assessments to help give validity to various different statements. Often 95% of somebody did this or said this, right? Yeah. Now, if you put biases in place that are going to make that happen more often, what is the validity of that particular assessment? Does it weaken it? But then if you put a bias in place that sort of goes the opposite direction, you're then making it perhaps more negative than it needed to be. Okay.
And
Really.
it kind of depends. I mean, the answer for any psychologist is it depends. If you take something like, so in my world, I'm obsessed with personality. And if you look at things like the horoscope, people have a real attachment to the horoscope, even though we know it's not scientifically valid or reliable. But it's printed in every newspaper, it's in every magazine, and people still ask, I'm a Leo, am I compatible with a Pisces? Because we have an innate desire to understand each other. Now, I can either get hung up on it's the horoscope and it's BS and you shouldn't be reading it and it's complete mythology, or I can find the useful part of the conversation, which is the bit afterwards, and use that. So you're a Taurus. What is it that makes you feel that sometimes you're stubborn, but you're also dependable? Those Taurian traits. That's where the magic is in what you do with the insight out of it, rather than is the tool absolutely perfect or does the label it produces good. And in employee surveys, it's kind of the same thing, that if we've done our diligence up front, that we're surveying as effectively as we can at the right times, or as close as we can with the right language, or as close as we can, what do we do with the output is far more important than this produced you as you're an ENTJ or you're a red or a blue, as we would say in some personality assessments.
Absolutely. No,
Sorry, Neil.
I do echo
it's the Danny show.
I echo what Danny was saying, because one of the things we push home is do not just take the data and leave it there. For God's sake, whoever your audience is, whether it's customers or staff, circle it back to them. Let them see the synopsis of all the feedback, because they can see, oh, you are actually listening, you are actually doing something with it. We had an example a few months ago where they changed something, and it sounds odd, in the car park. And we said, well, why'd you change it that? But he said, well, the customers said, well, there was this issue with the car parking spaces, so we make more car parking spaces. I said, brilliant. Did you tell the customers that that's what you did? Well, no, they can see. No, go back, tell them you've been listening, and this is the result of you listening. That's absolutely paramount. I mean, it's a poor example, but it's an example nonetheless. And the same true for staff, same true for franchise. The franchisees have an issue, deal with it head on, and resolve it, and show that you care and you're doing something about it.
It's not a poor example, Neil. I always say make a big deal of the little things before the little things become a big deal. And there's extra parking spaces. How frustrating is it when you go to do the Christmas shopping and you can't park anywhere near the door? And on the grand scale of things, it might feel that it's a bit insignificant, but personally, it's a real pain in the backside. So actually, you don't know how these little emotive touch points that you have with whether it's your customers or your employees, actually become the straw that breaks the camel's back, that makes them leave. So,
and of course, the reverse is true. If you actually demonstrate you're listening to them, they love you more. Your loyalty goes up,
of course,
because you demonstrate you're listening.
It sounds like you're saying happy bees make tasty honey there.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Let's have a look, because we have got I think we've already discussed this, but we've got a couple of comments here. Did I bring Penny's up? Yeah, Penny's just put, hello, Harvey, Danny and Neil. Looking forward to this week's discussion. And I didn't have your book, but I went and got it. You saw me disappear. I wanted to get Penny's book. Is it going to be the right way around today? We don't know. We never know. No, it's not.
No.
But if you want to get your manuals the right way round, talk to Penny. How about that, Penny? What about that?
That was good.
Let's have a look at what Simon's got to say as well. Simon's put, it's important to get feedback from the franchisees as they move through the franchisee life cycle, the universal journey for every franchisee. How do you create meaningful action plans from the data? This is a really interesting one, because we often talk in franchising of this life cycle, and it's very much about how franchisees feel. They're starting off very enthusiastic, looking forward to the future, excitement and so forth. And then, they settle in. Maybe it's not as exciting as they'd hoped. Maybe there's some challenges that they weren't thinking about, and then they start to go down the other side of it, where they're thinking, okay, I know what I'm doing now. I could do this, and how do we identify that sort of thing and create these meaningful action plans? Neil, you were saying there, and Danny, it's about doing something with what we're getting. That information that we're getting, isn't it?
Yeah, completely.
That's
and it's not, again, I emphasize the point, it's not just about the negative. It is also about, if you're getting positive responses, don't just sit on your laurels and say, oh, that's lovely. Play it back to them. Let them know. And if it teases a few people to the surface to say, well, that's not my view of things, great. But if everybody's getting behind it going, yeah, we all love this franchisor, they're doing right by us, you know what? That's a great message to bring to your next franchisee, because you could say 100% of our franchisees love what we do across all these metrics. Well, if you're not doing any of that work, you can't say that, and it's just hearsay and conjecture as to how much the franchisees do or don't love you.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting, and what you said there goes back to that bias again. And this is what I'm finding that's really interesting. If you send out an assessment that tries to identify whether you're doing a good job as a franchisor, if that's one of the reasons for it, and you get back the results that 95% of your network believe you are, then that's fantastic news. But what you've, I suppose, got to do is make sure that's as true as it can be. And when I say true, I mean that you haven't used biases that are pushing people that way or directing them that way.
Can I just interrupt and just say, and I'm sure Dan's going to agree with this one, anonymity breeds honesty.
Mm-hmm.
So give them anonymity and let them speak their truths, because if, as long as they can have anonymity, they can say, actually, I know in the corridor you asked me how things are, but the truth is, this is the situation. You want to know what the truth is. You desperately want to know what the truth is. I don't want to be played lip service. I want to know what's going on in my business. And if you don't think I'm doing it right, I want to know about it. Don't just say, yeah, everything's good. And anonymity really helps with that.
What do you make of this one, Danny? How do we, it's a big question, isn't it? How do we use the bias in an ethical way and in the right way? It's a very tricky question, I would imagine.
It is, and you know me, I'm quite verbose. I can chat about this stuff for a long time. I'm going to go off the record as a psychologist and say that it's the bias side is not as big of a deal as we think. If I was writing a thesis or a dissertation, I wouldn't be saying this. But in the real world, we all have biases. You can't get rid of them. Little tip: unconscious bias training. Don't buy it. Doesn't work. Our biases are there. They're just shortcuts in our mental cognition that help us save energy and stay alive. If I say what's 1 + 1, you knew the answer straight away because your system one, your bias system, knows that it doesn't need to think. If I ask you what's 13 times 62, then you'd have to stop and think it, and that falls into your system two, which is where your sort of rationality works. Being aware of your biases so that your rational side can capture it and make appropriate decisions is different to eradicating bias. We can't eradicate it; it's there for a reason. So that's the first bit. The second bit is coming back to your point about the excitement when you start franchises. All small businesses, whether franchise or direct, are started for one of two reasons, and that's passion or trauma. Passion is, I've got this side hustle, it's something I can now monetize, I've always wanted to do it, I'm super excited, let's go and do it. Trauma is, I don't like what I'm doing now, or I like what I'm doing now, but I could do it better on my own, or I just want to change my life and do something completely different. Either way, those two reasons are incredible fuel sources for starting a business. But like you say, you get 6 months in, maybe 2 years in, at some point that fuel gets expended. You've got a couple of employees, you've got bills to pay, you've got your license fees, etc., to carry on, and you've lost that spark. So being able to know why you did it in the first place, so what's that kind of North Star, that vision, that end kind of direction that you're heading towards, so you can help align things, is a good place to start. And then listening to the people around you. And part of that is having the tools, part of that's having the ears, and part of that, to come back to Simon's question about having the feedback, I'd change the word feedback to advice. So it's not I've got feedback, I've got advice for you. And that becomes a reciprocal, what have you got for me? And to finish the last of his sentence, how do you create meaningful action? You co-create meaningful action. None of us are smart as all of us. And you can only do that if you have some sort of conduit for the information to flow back and forth, whether that is one-to-one sessions, whether it's a mentor relationship, whether you're using platforms and assessments and survey tools. But recognizing my fuel is being expended and everything's getting a bit harder and I'm losing my sparkle and my buzz and my energy to do it, and being open to why do you think that might happen? Because to use, I talk in metaphors, nobody wants to be told their baby's ugly. Nobody wants to think it's their fault or that I've chosen the wrong kind of franchise or direction or market or location. There are no wrong markets and wrong locations if you're working together as a team, and you can't do that without that communication. Surveys, assessments are just another form of two-way communication.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you have just joined us today, this is the Franchise Show, and today we've been talking about feelings and how your franchisees are feeling and how we can perhaps get to the bottom of trying to work that one out, which we'll probably need a few more of these to do that, but we're getting there. We're having a good stab at it anyway. Now, we've come to the part of the show which I forgot to tell you gentlemen about, but if you've seen this before, you now know that this is something that happens, where for a moment my camera will go off because this is the point where I'm going to be changing my hat. Okay, and this is the part of the show that is brought to you by PJ Murphy, Bespoke British Hatters. And what do you think of the hat? And this is the part of the show where we're going to stop talking about franchising for a bit, and I want to know a little bit about Neil and Danny. So I'm going to ask you a little bit of a question about you as a person, and it's a fun little question. You have to go too deep. Have either of you either got a good claim to fame or met someone famous? This is the one that I like. So I'm going to start with you, Danny. Anything that somebody doesn't know about you, claim to fame, or have you met someone famous?
Yes, is the short answer. So when I was younger, so much younger than today, I was a singer. I was a choir boy, and in my diocese there was a group in the UK that took the best singers from each of the church dioceses, and they toured around the UK singing in cathedral gigs for special occasions. And as part of that, I sang for Princess Di.
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Excellent. Now, can you beat that, Neil?
No, it's simple as no. My story isn't as glamorous as that either.
It's not that glamorous. I was like 9 years old.
It's still good.
In a ruche. Yeah.
I've got somebody coming up. No, actually, I can't tell that. But there's a story about Pete Best, I think, coming up in one episode. But there you go. So, yes, Neil, have you met someone famous? Is there something we don't know about you? Some strange hobby you've got?
Too much strange hobby, but I'll stick with the famous thing. Although I'm not going to outdo Princess Diana, am I, by any stretch? I have sat down with Michelle Roux Jr., which was nice, because we work in hospitality as well, so get to go to nice functions. He is such a nice man, really, really lovely. Just got time for everybody. Yeah, couldn't say enough about how lovely he is.
I'm jealous of that because I'm a bit of a foodie, and B, my partner works on the trains and she used to look after the first class. So she meets all of these famous people. She echoes exactly what you said. I need to meet him. I need to taste my cheese on toast and tell me how fabulous it is.
Excellent. Well, that's fantastic stuff. Brilliant. Well, look, we have now come to the end because we don't like to keep it more than about 50 minutes. And I'm going to talk about what's happening next week as well. So first of all, this week on our sister show on Franchising Brand Stories, Thursday at 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST, we're going to be speaking to Ed Reed of TAB, the alternative board. And we're going to find out all about that. In fact, we're going to find out what's under the hat of TAB. And next week on the Franchise Show, we are going to be probably talking franchise influence or loyalty. And please join us for that one. And that will be next Tuesday, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST. So until next time, I would like to thank everyone who has been with us live today, everyone who's going to watch this in the future as well. And I'd like to thank our two wonderful guests today for sharing their insight. I always start with nothing written on a piece of paper, but I always end with a lot written on a bit of paper. So thank you for sharing with us today for both of you. So until next time, take very good care. Cheerio.
Thanks, Harvey.